I have an interesting thought that has been like percolating in my brain for a few weeks, I think. Well, longer than that, but it finally like found the wording for it, I suppose. Um, Authenticity versus hierarchy. So I'm talking specifically about leadership here. Um, and I've been stopped by many people and informed that I am a librarian. And thus, what do I know about a subject, or where is a certain book? And one of the biggest compliments that I think I've ever received is being seen as a librarian, and I will take it. But I am not actually a librarian. It's kind of one of the saddest things about my life. I didn't find out that you needed an actual degree to be a librarian until like I'd already gotten all my degrees, and then I went, well, nah, and I got into another field, which was lovely and it was great. But I love being mistaken for a librarian, and it makes me happy. Now, why is this important? When you're standing next to an actual librarian and someone asks you to be the librarian, and the librarian knows you well enough to go, yeah, you got this, and off they go. Like, the compliment, A, loved it, but B, it highlights something really interesting. Now, if I walked into NASA, there is not a single person who would be like, you are a mission control leader. Absolutely, of course you are. Come this way. No one is going to make that mistake at all. Books? Sure, I'm okay with this. I've also been in situations where my dad came to my college class that I was teaching, and he dresses like a professor. And he's much older than I am, and so many people stopped him in the hallways and asked him for directions. He'd never been to this campus. Nobody's asking me for directions. I'd been there for a couple of years. Clearly between the two of us, he looked more like the professor. People mistake others on a regular basis based on their assumptions, age, whatever. But I think what is interesting about this, and what I want to talk about, is the concept of hierarchy versus authority. So hierarchy is what our culture is really based on. It keeps everybody in order. It makes sure everybody knows kind of where they are and where they stand in the pecking order and stuff like that. And you can have it super formalized. Like in a lot of different countries, they have like a caste system, or they have the order of nobility and that kind of thing. And it's actually clearly delineated based on history and the economics of those times, and it kind of comes into today in certain ways. In America, we don't really have that. We do, but we don't. But what we have is job titles. What's interesting about it, though, is I watch a lot of people who are in leadership positions who have the structure and the scaffolding that we have created in companies and in society that make them the boss. And I gotta say, most of the bosses that I have met, inherently, intrinsically, authentically, they are not the boss. But for whatever reason, they can like move through the system and they can check all the boxes. But typically, they're people who really aren't the best person in the room to do the job. And I say this with great respect and love and everything like that. This is genuinely not a jab. This is like, we have a system that tends to put people in a position that is not inherently theirs. There are exceptions, of course. Absolutely, of course. But what fascinates me about this is when you have an inherent, authentic leader versus someone who has the scaffolding of leadership, when a crisis happens, you see who the heads turn to. Who are the one that immediately, they just calmly deal with the situation. They know how to handle it. They know the ins and outs. They're going to handle it. And everybody around them has an inherent trust in that person. And that is truly a beautiful thing. Those people, we want those people. They're brilliant. That's amazing. We also want the people for them to lead. Like, that's important too. Otherwise, we're just a bunch of leaders wandering around doing nothing, right? My cat needs my window open. All right. We're not going any further. And then you also have the leaders who are scaffolded in, and as soon as that scaffolding disappears, and sometimes even before it disappears, their leadership abilities crumble. There are certain people who, like, again, take my dad. He is a lovely, lovely person. He is a scholar. He is a teacher. He is a very compassionate man. And when you make him the boss, it's not great. Here's why. He doesn't like conflict. He doesn't like being the bad guy. And it literally eats him up from the inside. The man is not the person that wants to be the one calling the shots. He just wants to teach people and love them well. That is his heart. And if he had somebody who was calling the shots who just let him do the teaching and the scholarship, he would be the happiest man alive. It would be great. But when the business of his job forces these two things together so that he has to do both, in order to do the one, he has to do the other, it's requiring something of it. The actual scaffolding is requiring something of him that is not authentic to him, is not intrinsic to him, is not actually a good idea for him or anyone else. So why are we talking about this? What's cool about it is it highlights some interesting things about different people. There are just some people who are just too kind and loving to be a boss. There are other people who are just the right kind of kind and loving to be the best boss ever, because they have an empathy for their people. They have a fierceness and protection over their people, but they also are good enough to be like, I love you guys enough and I love this company enough to make the hard call, and I'm going to feel your feelings because, like, yes, you matter to me, but also this is what's best for us and it's going to be great. And there are robots who just look at the numbers and they don't care, and, like, who cares? And they move on. And everybody in between. Why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because our stories are all set in a world, and most of the worlds that we think of tend to have some sort of scaffolding, social structure around it that defines positions within a society. And I think a lot of people do play with this sometimes, where it's like the narcissist, and we have to go against the narcissist, or we have to, go against the man or the system or whatever. And sure, that's great. But what happens when you see someone actually actively, especially in a place of leadership or control, who it should never have been there? What do they not like about it? What is inherent in them where they would thrive in another location and thus they cannot thrive here? I think that's something really interesting to play with. And it creates layers for your characters. Instead of trauma, this isn't this isn't my thing. This isn't my thing. And then it also creates some really interesting characters who step outside of this, who have a longevity to our social consciousness that is really quite impressive. When you think of, for instance, King Arthur, the Arthurian legends are based entirely upon the fact that some guy pulled a sword out of a stone and then united all of Britain against all odds. Now, some of the stories have him as being like, you know, the poor kid. Other versions of the story, he is actually the son of the king. He's just been hidden away. But either way, you have a young nobody who, there's no reason to listen to him, but there was something in him that, yes, responded to the magic and the magic responded to him. But also from that point on, for the most part, we see him being a natural leader of men. That's kind of like, he found his place. This is his place. He's taking up that space. Joan of Arc is another one. A lot of the people and the legends and the myths and the historic figures that we have are people who had an actual inherent authority to them that was very authentic, and it alchemized the scaffolding around them and created a completely different social structure and hierarchy for that time, and it was genuinely world-changing. So when you're writing these stories, consider that. I think that's an element that we don't really play with quite as much as we could, especially as we're writing hero stories or we're writing take down the world stories. Like, why? Who? Why? Like, why is it this person? What about this person makes them inherently that person who's going to change the world in these ways? And then also, you know, take a look at yourself. What's inherent and authentic in you? And where can that be applied to? So anyway, like, comment, subscribe, all the things. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you later.